regard to swing states and undecided voters, it says two-parter. How influential do you think it is that you have people like Liz Cheney literally campaigning with Kamala Harris? And do you think that the message that it's important to cross political divides for this election, do you think that message is getting out to the people it's intended to reach?
I think it is helpful, and I think it is getting out to those targeted voters. You got a very defined set of what we'll call, for lack of a better term, pre-Trump Republicans, more traditional conservatives who've never become all that comfortable with him, Nikki Haley voters. And as we know, Haley was still receiving more than 20% of the vote in primaries, even after she withdrew from the race. And while Haley herself has endorsed Trump, I think primarily for reasons of future ability, national polls are showing 8, 9, 10% of Republicans are not supporting Trump. And so hearing from someone like Cheney, I think can have an impact on them. And going back to the last question that Maddie asked during the broader webinar, while that's not necessarily a message that's going to carry the day on national news day after day, it's a message that can be targeted to the relevant voter group that Harris needs to win over. So I think it is important.
What about programs like the Bulwark, which are, it's again pre-Trump Republicans who are like 100% pushing for Harris? Do you think the right people are watching those types of programs?
I don't think that most voters are, but I think a voter who votes for a challenger in a primary, even after that challenger has dropped out, is someone who's following politics closely enough to be receiving a message like this one in a general campaign. In other words, just because most voters aren't hearing a Liz Cheney-based message doesn't mean that the voters who need to hear it most aren't hearing it. So I think it is getting across on a more targeted and digital basis, as opposed to on NBC or on CNN.
Thanks.
I see Carol's got her hand up if you'd love to ask a question.
Yes. I want to make sure I'm not on mute.
You're not.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay. What is your opinion about the places that Trump has gone to campaign that are in blue states?
I think there's two things going on there. I think one, his campaign believes that they have so nationalized this discussion that even though he's appearing in a state that's not competitive, that the message is still being heard by voters they need to reach in other parts of the country.
That's fair.
So when he goes to Colorado and he talks about the Aurora project, he's not trying to win the state of Colorado, but he's trying to win swing voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan who are concerned about undocumented immigration. So part of it is recognizing a national audience is going to follow what he and Harris do, regardless of where they are. That said, we know that as nationalized as the election has become and as nationalized as politics has become, we also know that a candidate's appearance in a particular geographic area has a disproportionate impact there. So in other words, if my candidate goes to Utah, if my candidate goes to Massachusetts, they are going to reach a national audience, but they're going to have the greatest impact on the Salt Lake City and Boston media markets. The voters there are much more likely to hear their message than in the rest of the country. So I believe that the other reason, in addition to a national reach, that Trump is going to Colorado, that he's came to California, that he's going to Madison Square Garden in a couple of weeks, I think it's vanity. And he wants to be seen as a 50 candidate. We're going to ask all of you who aren't talking to put on your mute buttons, just so the rest of us can hear. So I think some of it is recognizing the national audience is going to follow a presidential candidate anywhere. Okay. But I think also there is an amount of vanity there in Trump believing that he's a 50-state candidate when there really isn't such a thing either in Republican or Democratic politics anymore.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, next hand I see up is from Jim.
Yeah, thank you. You know, Dan, I'm wondering why it is, or at least there is definitely the perception that Trump is getting a free ride from media, whether liberal or conservative, on his age and his inability to coherently answer questions, his refusal to go on CBS 60 Minutes. The questions being asked, why is he getting a free pass when one lousy debate performance killed the Biden re-election campaign?
I guess a couple thoughts. I don't think, Jim, that Trump is getting a free pass. Yesterday, as some of you may have read or seen, he cut off his rally half an hour early in order to simply play music and stand on stage and sway to it. And I have not seen a mainstream media organization that hasn't highlighted that and pretty strongly criticized him for it. And I think Trump's misstatements in public are getting roughly, if not precisely, as much attention as Biden's missteps did before the June debate. Now, the debate itself took that coverage to a different level, no question about it. But I think there's two differences in terms of impact. One is Trump's base is more loyal to him than Biden's base was to his. And so a less invested Biden supporter is going to be more concerned by Biden's missteps than Trump's most loyal supporters are going to be to his. Second, Trump, even though he's just as likely, sometimes more likely, to misstate something as Biden, because he does have so much more energy and bombast, Biden's relatively more restrained stage and media presence, I think, intensified the concerns about his age. So, in other words, Trump might be loud and he might be wrong, but he's loud and he's energetic. But to the premise of your question, I don't think that the mainstream news media is giving him a free pass at all. I just think the difference is it's having less of an impact with his base than Biden's missteps did with his.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Dan. And then I believe the next hand I saw up was Deborah.
Professor Schnur, thank you very much. Can you comment on what appeared to be a difference in the audience response at the New York Economic Club compared with the Chicago one in the interview with the editor-in-chief yesterday?
End of the Democratic.
Well, I think this relates to some degree to Jim's question, that while Trump did not appear on 60 Minutes, he did appear before the Chicago Economic Club being interviewed by the editor of Bloomberg News. So while he is putting a higher priority on advocacy media than Harris is, I think that's more a reflection of the difference in their campaign strategies, as we talked about earlier. As far as the audiences themselves, I think John Micklethwait was a little bit startled to hear that he'd received an adverse reaction. He, the moderator, had received somewhat of an adverse reaction from those who are presumably some Trump supporters in the audience of the Economic Club, and that's not something that was reflected in New York. But it's a reminder to us that while Trump's base of support are the type of working class voters I was talking about during the webinar, he still is able to reach into the ranks of higher income voters of the types who attend an Economic Club program like these. So I don't know that either one made as much news as a more direct media appearance might, but it demonstrates a campaign that while it prefers Fox and other types of conservative platforms, that they are willing to put their candidate into more even-handed circumstances.
To what do you attribute the audience response?
I attribute the audience response to some of the people in the audience being Trump supporters. And my guess is they were outnumbered by those who are Trump opponents in the audience. But I think there were enough people there who were supporting him that when they felt that Micklethwaite was being unnecessarily adversarial, that they let it be known. Now, some of that's numbers and some of it's attitude, but all of the demographics that we discuss in these programs are trends. They're not unanimous. There are some evangelical Christians who are supporting Harris. There are, as we talked about earlier, some voters from minority communities who are supporting Trump. And there are some college graduates and high income earners, and a decent number of them, who are supporting Trump. And even if they weren't to the majority of the economic club audience, there were enough of them there that they could be heard when they did express their displeasure.
Thank you.
Of course, really good question.
Thank you so much for that, Deborah. And then on the next hand I saw was Roger.
Hi, Dan, hi. First a comment, being in the South here with all these weather issues, not everybody's affected by directly, but we're all affected by really high insurance rates and affordability. So I wonder if that has any influence on the election here in the South. And the other question, a quick one, is what do you think Harris is trying to achieve by going on Fox News?
Harris is trying to reach swing voters. You know, we tend to equate when we talk about cable news and advocacy media, we tend to equate MSNBC and Fox because they represent opposite ends of the spectrum. But truth of the matter is, for better or worse, Fox draws a much larger audience. And while Trump is running a base motivation campaign, as I talked about earlier, Harris does recognize the need to reach beyond her base. And she realizes that particularly because she's not going to be able to convince Trump to do another debate in all likelihood, a high profile appearance on Fox not only allows her to reach those swing voters, but might possibly generate the type of media coverage that a larger scale news event might. So it's not a debate, but it's also going to attract more attention for her than an MSNBC interview or even a CBS or an ABC interview. So some of it's voter targeting and some of it's just trying to heighten awareness and attention.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Dan. I see a question from John in the chat. John, do you want me to read that, or would you like me to, you want to come on screen and read it?
You can go ahead and read that.
All right, I got you. So John's question is, there is less national emphasis on the composition of the Senate than the presidency. Is there a lack of concern regarding the future of the Supreme Court if the presidency and Senate politically align?
You know, it's a really important question. And what we've known for years, both in Senate and in presidential campaigns, is we know that conservative voters have tended to prioritize the court to a much greater degree than progressive voters. Republicans, candidates tended to talk about the Supreme Court more over the years than Democrats have. So it's become more of a motivational issue for their base. Now, in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision 2 years ago, and of course, this is the first presidential election we've seen since then, but even in midterms in 2022, we saw that change. And for the first time in modern history, Democrats are looking at the court as a vote determinant issue to the same or an even greater level than Republicans are. At least that was the case in the midterms in 2022. There's no reason to expect that it won't be the case again next month in both the presidential campaign and its Senate races. You know, Harris's strongest issue by far is the issue of abortion rights. And if she wins this election, that will be the issue that gives it to her. So being able to motivate her existing support base on the basis of the Supreme Court and the decisions that makes, particularly on contentious social issues like abortion, that's the key to her victory. But it does rely on Democrats being as or more motivated to vote on court-related issues as Republicans do. And most Democrats in contested Senate races around the country, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, and plenty of others, are just as reliant on that motivation and just as reliant on their supporters' focus on the court.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. Oh, and we have a hand up from Sid and Sandy.
Hi, Dan.
Is it?
Yeah, got Sandy over here. She has a question for you.
I really have two, but I'll start with the one that I don't think nobody's asked about. Harris seems kind of not as popular among young men that are basically Latino or Black. And I'm just wondering how important it is to think about if they play an important part more than we even know. And then I had another question. I'll give you, you can pick both or none or one. Michigan has a very strong Muslim population that don't seem happy with either candidate. But the progressive wing of the Democratic Party favors Harris, I believe, even though she's not quite with them all the way. How important can that be if they vote for Trump, or would they, just to show displeasure with Harris?
So two great questions. I'm going to start with the gender one, and frankly, I should have spent more time on this in the webinar. So Sandy, I'm really glad you raised it again. Harris is struggling with young male voters. Now, we all know that there's been a gender gap in American politics for more than 40 years. Men are much more likely to vote Republican, women are much more likely to vote Democrat. But what's really interesting is in this election, it's the first time we've ever seen a gender gap that's more intense generationally. And the youngest voters are much more divided by gender than their parents or grandparents. So the Generation Z men of all races and ethnicities are more likely to be Trump supporters than their fathers and grandfathers. And young women of Gen Z are much more likely to be Harris supporters than their mothers and grandmothers. And that trend, you've all heard me say this before, politics lives downstream from culture. Young men we know are less likely to attend and graduate from college than young women. You know that the unemployment rate among young men is higher than among young women. And so just as Trump has reached out to the working class, while Republican candidates generally reached out to the working class successfully in other ways, these young men socioeconomically are more drawn to a Republican message, while young women, Maddie and her friends, are much more likely to be drawn to the Democratic Party for the same reason that other college graduates and other higher earning income, we know what a lavish salary you make, Maddie, at the LA World Affairs Council Town Hall, are more likely to lean Democrat. So the challenge that Harris is facing with young Black men and young Latino men is getting the most attention because these racial and ethnic communities have historically been so strongly Democratic. But the broader gender gap and the broader gender challenge between the two parties is at an all-time high. And as Madison and her generational colleagues get older, at least at this point, it looks like that gap is only going to grow bigger. Young men are alienated, and a lot of alienated people of all ages are more likely to vote for Trump. Young women are more likely to be educationally and professionally successful, and those are voters of all genders and of all ages, or more likely to lean Democrat. So that challenge that you talk about, Sandy, manifests itself in elections, but you need to go much further upstream toward cultural and societal divisions that are growing between the two genders among our youngest generations. That's probably, and Richard, Maddie, this is probably a webinar or an in-person program for us to do at some point. which is the growing generation gap between young women and young men, not just in politics, but in society, because it is getting much, much bigger. As far as Harris and the Middle East and Arab American and Muslim voters in Michigan and elsewhere, it's somewhat of a mixed bag for her. The unaffiliated delegates from Michigan and Minnesota and other Midwestern states, Democratic delegates who did not endorse her candidacy because of Gaza, they have now endorsed her candidacy. That unaffiliated group is supporting Harris. But we're seeing both anecdotal and statistical evidence in the state of Michigan in particular, where large numbers of Arab Americans and Muslim voters are either voting for Trump or more likely to sit home or vote for a third or fourth party candidate because they are so unhappy with the Biden and Harris administration on Middle East related issues. Michigan, of course, is an incredibly close race, just like the other 6 swing states are. There, as you correctly pointed out, a considerable Arab and Muslim population there. It appears now that Harris will win the majority in those communities, but not by the type of margin the Democratic candidates have done historically. And we don't know if that in such a close race, whether that's determinative or not. She'll win it, but the question is about what margin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then I do want to do the question that we have in the chat first before we go to Jim over here. It's saying, what could Barack Obama do to adjust his messaging to young Black male voters? His earlier comments seem to have missed the mark.
Yeah, look, I mean, every one of us, with the exception of Maddie and Kira, either has children or grandchildren or knows young people of child and grandchild age. And we all know about the generation gap. We know what it's like when older people try to tell young people how to live their lives. And Barack Obama, who had an extraordinarily skill as a younger man running for president and reaching out to young voters, might not be quite as attuned to what those young people are thinking now, 15, 16 years before he first ran for president. So you can understand the core of his message. If there is a challenge for the Harris campaign with Black men and Latino men, Obama believes, for understandable reasons, that he's in a position to address those concerns in a way that Bill Clinton or Joe Biden can't. But I think what Obama did not anticipate is a more admonishing, scolding tone may have not had the kind of impact he wanted to. And he's falling under some criticism for it. Now, we don't know that. We don't know if young Black men across the country are angry at Barack Obama for the way he phrased that. We haven't seen polling on that. We have seen some very vocal individuals criticizing Obama's messaging choices, but we don't yet know whether the majority of his target audience agrees with those criticisms or not. But like most of us, as we get older, we become less capable of understanding what's important to young people. And as someone who's in the classroom every day with people in the early 20s, I can tell you it's a lot harder for me than it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I'm not surprised that it's a bit more of a challenge for Barack Obama also. Jim, by the way, I meant to compliment you on your tie and your haircut earlier. You're looking very spiffy.
Yeah, thank you. I wish it was for better reasons. I'm running between funerals and a shiva.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So yes. In fact, after this, I'll be heading out to Agora Hills for a longtime member of the Temple Judea Brotherhood who passed away. So in memory of Ron Spiegel. Dan, this is, I guess I'll call it breaking news. Our Secretaries of State and Defense just issued a warning to the state of Israel to improve the Gaza humanitarian situation. They've got 30 days to do it, or we are going to cut off military aid. Now, tying that in with what's going on in my beloved Michigan, I'm wondering how much that will swing the vote. And before you answer, I mean, you and I are both members of the Jewish community. Most of us I think just because someone's Jewish, that isn't enough for the vote, or, to not vote. That does seem a little different with this community. And of course, Gaza is a very hot topic, and rightfully so. But I guess with that, let's turn to the breaking news. And could this be one of those swing moments that might be designed to get the crowd back into the room, so to speak?
I think you always want to give a president of either party the benefit of the doubt that when they take an action like this, it's for real world reasons. And that said, even decisions that are made for real world reasons and not for political reasons still have political ramifications.
Yes.
So even if Biden made this decision without even thinking for a moment about the 2024 election, his decision still is going to have an impact on the race. So a couple of things going on here, none of which are going to surprise any of you. Biden has clearly had it with Netanyahu. He's just sick of it. And to some degree, this is him expressing frustration in a potentially tangible way. Second, it's worth noting that this announcement was made almost in tandem with the US's announcement that it's sending 1,000 anti-missile defense to Israel to protect against further Iranian aerial attack, the THAAD missiles. So on one hand, the Biden administration is warning Israel, either get better at the humanitarian effort or we're cutting off the aid. At the same time, with the other hand, they're sending additional missiles to Israel to defend itself against Iran. I'm not suggesting that those two actions are inconsistent. I don't think they are. But I think they represent a conflict that every American president in recent history has faced. On one hand, wanting to protect Israel, not just for Israel's sake, but for broader geopolitical reasons, but also at the same time, encouraging Israel toward what we consider to be better and more appropriate behavior. If I had to guess, I would say that within the next 30 days, Israel, like it did earlier this year, will step up its humanitarian efforts in Gaza. And that'll be the end of the Biden administration threat. But the fact that Biden felt it necessary to make the threat, I think, was based on his frustration with the current Israeli government that has not been listening to him on Gaza, on Lebanon, on Iran, or on much else. As far as the political impact on the election, I don't think it will have much impact at all. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm assuming that I know other Republicans have already harshly criticized the Biden administration for this warning. I'm sure Trump will be very vocal and very angry on it. Trump is likely to do slightly better with Jewish voters than he and other Republicans have in the past, but only slightly. So while I think this provides a potential motivational advantage for Trump with a small number of voters, I don't think it has much of a broader impact on either Trump or Harris's candidacy. Harris will be asked about it, of course. She will give a an answer that's supportive of Biden, but within a broader discussion of Middle Eastern politics. I think it's a really, really important action, Jim, as it relates to the Middle East. I don't think it's a declaration that's going to end up having much of an effect on November 5th.
Thanks. And one shameless plug, it is on YouTube. Rabbi Josh Aronson of Temple Judea's Yom Kippur morning sermon, which impacts this as well. And I'm in total agreement with him. And I think you and I are not far apart on this. I think that, and I say this as an American Jew, that, yeah, Netanyahu has to be brought to heel.
Well, longer conversation for another day, but since we're doing shameless plugs, as many of you know, I'm all, in addition to this really wonderful webinar I get to do with all of you, I'm also the U.S. politics editor of the Jewish Journal here in Los Angeles. And my column tomorrow morning goes up on whether, in retrospect, Josh Shapiro might have been a better decision for Harris, given the importance of the state of Pennsylvania in this election. Anyway, it's great to see all of you. As always, as much as I love these half-an-hour discussions, I don't feel like they're anywhere near long enough, that we've just scratched the surface on a lot of important conversations. So I will look forward to seeing all of you post-election and to continuing these discussions going forward long after the next president's been selected. Thanks as always. You're all terrific. I really appreciate your participation.